One of the things that Donald Trump is concerned about if he loses this election is the possible prosecution that he's gonna have to deal with. And as we know, Trump loves to engage in criminality, so it's definitely gonna be a doozy. So how do we know this? Well, he's been speaking to his close advisors about his fears, and here are the details. Trump has for weeks told advisors that he expects to face intensifying scrutiny from prosecutors if he loses. He's concerned not only about existing investigations in New York, but the potential for new federal probes as well. And what kind of federal probes would Trump have to face? Well, as you guys know, one of the biggest issues that I wish were investigated further by his political opponents, but they haven't been, is money-related stuff. So his own personal lawyer, former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen, testified under oath that Donald Trump committed tax fraud by deflating his assets in order to avoid paying taxes. And then he would inflate his assets in order to obtain loans that he had no business obtaining because he's a man who has gone bankrupt 6 different times. And so he is worried about those various investigations. But on top of that, he's worried about the IRS continuing its audit. Remember, he had received an insane $79 million tax refund one year. And so understandably, the IRS is concerned about tax fraud in that case. And that audit has been paused as he serves as president. But as soon as he's no longer president, it is assumed that that audit will continue. And he's likely to owe the IRS $100 million.
Okay, big dog's in a world of trouble. As we'll explain later, Deutsche Bank might also call in $340 million worth of loans. Oops, he ain't got no money, man. He doesn't have the $100 million for the federal government. He doesn't have the $340 million for Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank's not as concerned because they're like, he gave us personal guarantee. Now Trump, for a long time, wasn't doing that because every single company he'd ever run had gone bankrupt. And he had lost all of his money in the beginning and learned, oh, no, only play with other people's monies, other suckers' monies, right? But by the end, he had no choice. He had no options left. Nobody was gonna give him a loan. So he gets all of these loans and they're personal guarantees. Bottom line on that means, just like when you play Monopoly, which is based in Atlantic City, where Donald Trump first went bankrupt, then you have to break down your hotels and your houses and you have to give it over to the bank because they own it, you don't. So that's what he's got to look forward to. The White House might be the last house that he lives in. He'll be homeless afterwards. Exaggeration, okay? Exaggeration, but not by much. So he's really worried about losing the money. That's a primary concern. But now, and only because of the spotlight is he worried about the crimes. Because he's been committing crimes his whole life and never had to pay the consequences. I mean, a number of undocumented immigrants that he used on his projects in the most flagrant ways possible, and he never got held accountable. He's been cheating on his taxes for decades, never got held accountable because you just drown them in lawyers and the rich get away with almost everything in this country. But now there's a giant spotlight on him. Federal government's coming after him for the money, but maybe potentially new crimes, because I mean, he commits a crime every day. Today, he's running his political war room out of the White House. I know, like, we're used to his crimes, so it seems like a relatively minor one, but it's a Hatch Act violation. You're not allowed to use government buildings and property that we all paid for as taxpayers for your political campaign. But you know why he's doing it, by the way? Because he had to build a wall around the White House because he's created such chaos. That's the state we're in now. So he didn't want to go to his Trump hotel where he was gonna have his war room because he was worried he wouldn't make it out and be able to get back into the White House safely. That's the kind of insanity that has happened in Trump's America. And now he's on top of all that, worried about crimes he's gonna be held accountable for in New York, where they're going to be highly motivated to pursue him. And honestly, before even Democratic prosecutors would take contributions from people like Donald Trump and look the other way. Our system is sick. When Trump leaves, it will not be solved. We still have to actually fix the underlying problems that created Trump in the first place. But Trump is just a festering wound of that sick system. We got to clean up the wound first.
Look, I totally agree with you that we have to clean up that wound. I'm gonna make a prediction. I predict that the IRS will probably continue auditing him, and there could possibly be a consequence if it is proven that he committed tax fraud in order to avoid paying taxes. I don't think that the other prosecutions are gonna go anywhere. I don't. I don't think he's ever gonna see a day in a prison cell. I think he might end up settling certain things, but I just don't. When it comes to his loans from Deutsche Bank, like there's a big story out about how Deutsche Bank is gonna demand that he pay the money back. Let me give you those details. Deutsche Bank has about $340 million in loans outstanding to the Trump organization. In meetings in recent months, a Deutsche Bank management committee has discussed ways in which it could rid the bank of these last vestiges of the relationship. Two of the three bank officials said the bank has over the years lent Trump more than $2 billion. It's really funny because they were looking to sell the loan, to sell the debt to a different company, and then they would try to collect it from Trump. But wouldn't you know, they're having difficulty finding anyone who'd be willing to do that. And so what Trump does is he files lawsuits against creditors alleging that they were predatory in their lending. And then he drags the lawsuit out as long as he possibly can. The bank ends up spending a ton of money on litigation, and then eventually they'll just settle either for a fraction of that amount or they'll just let it go. I mean, if you guys can remember the Trump Tower Chicago story that we talked about, he defaulted on that loan and then he immediately sued them, and then they were just like, oh, all right, whatever, we'll just let it go. And they didn't even seize his building. They just let it go completely because they didn't want to have to continue dealing with the lawsuit. It's just, that's how he plays. So he always finds ways to get out of things, and I want him to find ways to get out of the White House. Like, that's my number one concern.
Well, Irene in our member section wrote in and said, I hope running for president was the biggest mistake he ever made. And there's some chance that's true. And the Deutsche Bank story is a good example of that. When no one was looking, Deutsche Bank is giving him loans, they're giving Russian oligarchs loans and getting money from them. And I was gonna say money laundering, I hesitated before such a heavy charge, but then I remembered, no, they actually paid a fine for money laundering. And let alone the drug cartels and everybody else that they money laundered for. The rich get away with almost everything, unless there's a giant spotlight on. And now, because of Trump, there's a giant spotlight on Deutsche Bank. And Deutsche Bank, by getting rid of Trump, wants to go, get rid of the spotlight, get rid of the spotlight. So we can go back to our normal criminality that we pay normal fines for, and it's part of our profits, and we go on with our merry lives, right? So before Trump might have been an asset for their relationships with others, now he's definitely a liability. They're not even positive he could pay it back. That's why they're talking about seizing his assets. And are they gonna dump him? Yes. Now, it's not gonna happen overnight. Those loans, those particular loans don't come due for another 2 years. And if you try to get it early, Trump would fight you to the end of time on that. And so they'll have some trouble getting Trump to pay anything because he's a con man. That's why he went bankrupt 6 times and just didn't pay his bills. And he says, oh, smart people don't pay their bills. What happened to personal responsibility? Well, what happened is you might round the corner, Trump, and run into that brick wall of personal responsibility for the first time in your life after this election. And that's why he's in a cold sweat panic that he's gonna lose today. And he is. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.